the smell of blood, and animal urine. Year 203 CE. You're standing in a dark tunnel beneath the Carthage amphitheater. Stone walls pressing in from both sides. The only light coming from a grate above your head. Through that grate you can hear them. 50,000 people screaming, chanting, stomping their feet until the walls shake. They're waiting for you. Your name is Perpetua. You're 22 years old. You come from a wealthy family. You had a husband, a newborn son, a life that should have been comfortable and long. 3 weeks ago, soldiers came to your house. They asked one question. Are you a Christian? You could have lied. Your father begged you to lie. He fell to his knees in the prison cell, tears streaming down his face, holding your infant son up to you. He said, just say the words. Just burn a pinch of incense to the emperor's image. No one will know what you really believe. You looked at your baby. You looked at your father. And you said no. Now you're standing in a tunnel that smells like death, wearing nothing but a thin linen shift, waiting for the guards to open the gate that leads to the arena floor. You can hear the crowd chanting one word, over and over. Bestias, bestias, bestias. The beasts. They want to see you torn apart by animals. The gate begins to rise. Sunlight floods the tunnel, blinding you for a moment, and then you step forward onto the sand. This is what Rome did to Christian women who refused to deny their faith, not in secret, not in shame, but in front of cheering crowds who ate figs and drank wine while watching young mothers die. The arena wasn't just entertainment. It was a machine designed to break an entire religion, and the women they threw onto that sand were chosen deliberately because Rome understood something. Kill a man and you create a martyr, but destroy a woman, a mother, a daughter, a virgin, destroy her publicly, slowly, in ways that strip away every shred of dignity, and you send a message that echoes across generations. If this story grabs you, hit the like button. One click helps us keep uncovering the voices history tried to silence. But before you understand what happened to these women, you need to understand why Rome hated Christians so much. It wasn't about theology. Romans didn't care what you believed. Their empire contained thousands of gods. Egyptians worshiped cats. Germans worshiped trees. Persians worshiped fire. Rome absorbed them all. But Christians were different. They refused to participate. Roman society ran on public religion. You burned incense at the emperor's shrine to show loyalty. You attended temple festivals to show you belonged. You made sacrifices before business deals, before marriages, before any important event. Christians wouldn't do any of it. They called Roman gods demons. They refused to serve in the army. They held secret meetings at night where they spoke of eating flesh and drinking blood. The Eucharist, misunderstood by outsiders as cannibalism. They called each other brother and sister, even when they weren't related. They spoke of loving their enemies. They welcomed slaves as equals. To Roman authorities, this wasn't a religion, it was a conspiracy. A secret society that rejected everything Rome stood for, that grew larger every year, that couldn't be bribed, couldn't be intimidated, couldn't be absorbed like every other cult. And the most dangerous thing about Christians, they weren't afraid to die. Roman power rested on fear. Crucifixion, torture, execution. These tools worked because people feared them. But Christians spoke of death as a doorway. They sang hymns on their way to execution. They forgave their torturers with their dying breaths. How do you control people who welcome death? You make death so horrible, so degrading, so public that even the bravest believer hesitates. That's what the arena was for. The Romans had turned public execution into performance. When a Christian was condemned to die, the method depended on their social class. Citizens might receive beheading, quick, relatively dignified. But most Christians weren't citizens. They received damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Here's how it worked. The condemned were brought to the arena during the midday executions, the lunch break between the morning animal hunts and the afternoon gladiator fights. This was considered the low entertainment. Filler content. While wealthy Romans went home to eat, the poor stayed, the slaves stayed, the bloodthirsty stayed. And that's when they brought out the Christians. The condemned were stripped naked or dressed in animal skins to provoke the beasts. They were tied to posts or released onto the sand. Then the gates opened. Lions, bears, leopards, wild boars, whatever animals were available. The beasts were kept hungry for days before the show. Sometimes they were goaded with hot irons to make them more aggressive. Sometimes they were trained specifically to target humans. The crowd watched everything. They watched the animals circle their prey. They watched the first charge. They watched the mauling, the screaming, the desperate attempts to escape. They watched until movement stopped. And then they roared. But here's what they don't teach you. What they did to the women was designed to be worse than death. Subscribe to the Obscure Chronicles. We don't flinch from history's darkest chapters. For Christian women, the arena wasn't just about death. It was about humiliation. Roman law had specific provisions for how female prisoners should be executed, and those provisions were designed to destroy them spiritually before destroying them physically. Women were stripped naked before being sent onto the sand. This wasn't incidental. It was deliberate. Roman society placed enormous value on female modesty. A woman's honor, her family's honor, depended on her body remaining unseen by strangers. To strip a woman naked in front of 50,000 screaming spectators was to announce that she was no longer human, that her dignity meant nothing, that her body belonged to Rome to do with as it pleased. The crowd didn't just watch. They commented, they pointed, they laughed. Some women tried to cover themselves with their hands. Others stood frozen, eyes fixed on some point in the distance, retreating into their minds to escape what was happening to their bodies. But the humiliation didn't stop there. Sometimes women were hung by their hair from wooden frames. Sometimes they were covered in nets, so they couldn't move. Sometimes they were tied to bulls or wild horses and dragged across the arena. Roman cruelty found new forms every day. And the women who were virgins, young girls who had consecrated themselves to Christ, received special attention. Roman law technically prohibited the execution of virgins. So before a virgin Christian could be killed, she had to be made not a virgin. The guards took care of that the night before. Then, having satisfied the legal requirement, they threw her to the beasts. Think about that for a moment. A legal system so concerned with procedural correctness that it required women to be violated before they could be executed. Evil wrapped in procedure. Cruelty with paperwork. And the crowd cheered through all of it. In the year 177 CE, in the city of Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon, France, a slave woman named Blandina was arrested with dozens of other Christians. She was small, physically weak. Her owner, a Christian woman who had raised her almost as a daughter, wept when they took her away. Everyone expected Blandina to break. Under torture, slaves usually confessed within hours. They named names. They renounced their faith. They said whatever their torturers wanted to hear just to make the pain stop. Blandina didn't break. They tortured her from morning until evening. The Roman interrogators worked in shifts because they exhausted themselves. They used every technique they knew, the rack, the hot irons, the whips embedded with metal. She said the same words over and over. "I am a Christian. We do nothing evil." That's all she would say, hour after hour, tool after tool, the same 7 words. The executioners admitted they were amazed. They had never seen anyone, man or woman, slave or citizen, endure so much. When torture failed to break her, they decided to make a spectacle of her death. They brought her to the arena on a day when the crowds were largest. They tied her to a wooden post in the center of the sand, arms spread wide, forming the shape of a cross. Then they released the beasts. Lions, bears, leopards. The animals circled her. They paced. They growled. They didn't attack. The crowd grew restless. They had come to see blood. They started throwing things into the arena. Food, rocks, garbage. The animal handlers goaded the beasts with burning brands. Still they didn't attack. One lion approached Blandina, sniffed her feet, and walked away. Was it her stillness? Her complete absence of fear? The smell of torture that clung to her body? Something about this tiny slave woman made the animals hesitate. The Romans were embarrassed. Their spectacle was failing. They removed Blandina from the arena. They would try again later. For days, She was forced to watch as her fellow Christians were executed one by one. They made her sit in the front row. They made her see everything. Then they brought her back for her own death. This time they didn't rely on unpredictable animals. They placed her in a net and threw her before a wild bull. The bull gored her repeatedly, tossing her body into the air, but still she didn't cry out. Finally, when the bull lost interest, an executioner cut her throat. The pagans who watched her die said they had never seen a woman suffer so much, so long, with so little complaint. Even Romans who hated Christians admitted she was remarkable. Her body was burned, and the ashes thrown into the Rhone River. The Romans wanted nothing left. No relics, no grave, no place where Christians could come to remember her. But they failed, because 2,000 years later, we're still telling her story. Return to Carthage. Return to Perpetua. She kept a diary in prison. We still have it. One of the oldest Christian texts written by a woman. Her words let us inside her head in the days before her execution. She writes about her father's visits. An old man, well respected in the community, who couldn't understand why his daughter wouldn't just speak the words that would save her life. Daughter, have pity on my gray hairs. Have pity on your father. Think of your child, who cannot live without you. Give up your pride. Do not destroy us all. Perpetua looked at him. Father, do you see this water pot lying here? Can it be called by any other name than what it is? He said no. Neither can I call myself by any other name than what I am, a Christian. Her father beat his head against the ground. He tore his beard. He wept until the guards dragged him away. Perpetua records that moment in her diary. She writes that watching her father's grief was the hardest thing she endured, harder than prison, harder than knowing she would die. But she couldn't deny what she was. Her last diary entry describes a vision. She saw herself transformed into a man, fighting an Egyptian gladiator in the arena. She defeated him. She stepped on his head, and she woke knowing she would face death and win. The diary ends there. What happened next was recorded by an eyewitness. On March 7th, 203 CE, the birthday of Emperor Geta, Perpetua and 4 other Christians were led into the Carthage arena. With her was Felicitas, a pregnant slave girl who had given birth just 3 days earlier. The baby was taken from her immediately. She never saw the child again. The crowd had been anticipating this spectacle for weeks. A noble woman, a slave, and 3 men, all refusing to renounce their faith, all choosing death. The Romans had prepared something special. For the women, they had chosen a wild heifer, a female animal, to match the female prisoners. This wasn't about efficiency. It was about symbolism. Perpetua and Felicitas were stripped naked and brought out in nets. The crowd reacted strangely. For the first time, they protested, not out of mercy, out of disgust. One woman was clearly of noble birth. The other had obviously just given birth. Her breasts were still swollen with milk, her body still recovering. Even the Roman crowd had limits. Watching these 2 specific women, in their specific conditions, cross some invisible line, the officials noticed. They removed the women from the arena and brought them back clothed in simple tunics. But they still sent them to die. The heifer attacked Perpetua first. It tossed her into the air. She landed hard, her tunic torn, exposing her. The eyewitness account records what she did next. She sat up, gathered her torn tunic around her, and arranged her hair. Her hair. A Roman woman's hair was her glory, her modesty. Even in the arena, even bleeding from a wound that would kill her, Perpetua's first instinct was to tie up her hair so she would look dignified. She saw Felicitas lying nearby, wounded by the same heifer. She stood, walked over, and helped her friend to her feet. They stood together, supporting each other, waiting for whatever came next. The crowd fell silent. Something was happening that silenced them. These women weren't screaming. They weren't begging. They were comforting each other while dying. The officials called for the gladiators. A young, inexperienced fighter approached Perpetua. His hand was shaking so badly he missed her throat and struck her collarbone. She cried out, the first sound she had made. Then she did something the eyewitness couldn't explain. She took the gladiator's trembling hand and guided the blade to her own throat. Perhaps such a woman could not have been killed unless she herself willed it. Those are the eyewitness's exact words. He couldn't explain what he saw any other way. Let that sink in. Not every Christian woman faced animals. Some were burned alive. The Romans would erect a wooden stake in the center of the arena, tie the condemned to it, pile kindling at their feet, and light the fire while the crowd watched. Death by burning was slow. The smoke killed some before the flames reached them. Others were not so fortunate. Some women were covered in pitch before being burned, so they would ignite faster and burn more completely. Emperor Nero, after the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE, used Christians as human torches to light his garden parties. He covered them in wax and oil, tied them to poles, and set them ablaze after dark. Wealthy Romans strolled through gardens, admiring the decorations, sipping wine, while human beings burned above them. Tacitus, a Roman historian who despised Christians, still called this cruel excess. Even pagans had limits that Nero crossed. But here's what Rome never understood. Every execution created more Christians. The crowds came expecting to see cowards beg. They saw people forgive their killers with their final breaths. They came expecting to see animals tear apart helpless victims. They saw a tiny slave woman make lions back away. They came expecting entertainment. They saw something that looked strangely like victory. Tertullian, a Christian writer from this period, observed the pattern. The blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. Kill one Christian, and 10 more appeared. Execute a woman in front of 50,000 spectators, and half of them went home wondering what could make someone face death like that. The Romans couldn't understand it. Their entire system of control depended on fear. But Christians had found something stronger than fear. For 300 years, Rome tried to destroy Christianity through spectacle and violence. It didn't work. In 313 CE, Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity throughout the empire. 70 years later, Emperor Theodosius made Christianity the official state religion. The same arenas that had witnessed Christian executions were converted into churches. The same crowds that had cheered for blood now attended Mass. The empire that tried to erase Christianity was itself erased, converted, transformed, conquered from within by the faith of women who wouldn't deny their God. Think about that. Every emperor who ordered the persecutions is forgotten. Their names survive only in textbooks. But Perpetua, Felicitas, Blandina, their names are still spoken aloud every year on their feast days in churches around the world. The Romans wanted them erased. Instead, they became eternal. The Colosseum still stands in Rome today. Tourists take selfies on the same sand where Christian women died. They buy postcards. They post photos with smiling faces, thumbs up vacation memories. Most don't know they're standing on a mass grave. No one knows exactly how many Christians died in the Roman arenas. Thousands certainly, tens of thousands possibly. The records are incomplete, and Rome wasn't interested in counting victims. But beneath the tourist attractions and the gelato stands, beneath the streets where Romans once cheered for blood, the soil holds what remains of people who chose death over denial. Women like Perpetua, who guided the blade to her own throat. Women like Blandina, who made lions back away. Women like Felicitas, whose milk still stained her tunic when she died. They were meant to be forgotten, burned until nothing remained, thrown into rivers, denied burial. Rome wanted them gone. 2,000 years later, we know their names. If this reached you, subscribe to the Obscure Chronicles. We dig into the chapters history tried to erase, because the past isn't dead. It's waiting in the dark, waiting for someone to remember. We don't look away.